Kia ora. Kia ora. Tracy Martin.
Kia ora, Mr Speaker. Thank you very much. I rise on behalf of New Zealand First to oppose the Education Update Amendment Bill. Can I start by saying how much I miss Nikki Kay as the chair of the Education and Science Select Committee? There was a woman that actually knew collaboration. There was a woman who should have been the Minister of Education because she knew how to listen, she knew how to work with the sector, she knew how to actually be a visionary but take people with her. Mr Muller's contribution was condescending and paternalistic and basically laid out the way that the Education and Science Select Committee is working at the moment after the government, what it did with regard to the Education Legislation Bill and what happened at Select Committee there, where the government has made sure it's loaded that Select Committee so that regardless of the conversation that takes place, regardless of the open-mindedness of the opposition and attempts to work across it, the government has the numbers and the government knows it. I also, sir, want to say how much I miss Cam Calder, another gentleman who was the chair of the Education and Science Select Committee, who also knew how to reach out to opposition parties, to politely and respectfully have discussions about something that is incredibly important to our nation, and that is the education of our young people. If we get back to this bill, can I just make a couple of things clear, sir? It has been mentioned this evening that one of the things that this bill does is allow cohorts of 5-year-olds or children 8 weeks before they turn 5 to enter the school system. They have always been able to do it for the last 27 years. Every Board of Trustees has had the opportunity to make that decision for their community. This bill does not do that. Government members. What this bill does is that if a school decides to have cohorts begin at the beginning of a term, once those children are signed into the school, they must attend on every single day or they will be part of the truancy problem. So let's be clear, please, government members, what it is that you're actually talking about. Go and read the 13 regulatory impact statements before we end up in the Education and Science Select Committee and the opposition has to explain it to you and then you condescendingly just vote past it. Secondly, the Minister has mentioned, and other members have taken her at her word, that consultation took place. 1,800 people submitted. I was part of that consultation process as the chair of the board of Mahirangi College. Let me describe it to you. It was a 1-hour consultation meeting called at regular places around the country, where the first 30 minutes was where the Ministry of Education official explained to us what the Minister wanted, what was out of scope, governance was out of scope, other things were out of scope. Once they had finished, they broke you into small groups of 3 or 4 people with the bullet points that the Minister had given you. You had 20 minutes to write it on a large A3 sheet of paper before they were collected up. Thank you very much, there's a scone over there and off you go. So it's all very well and good to say that there were 1,800 people who participated, that there were 120 meetings throughout the country. It's the quality of consultation that actually makes a difference. Not the fact that you've marked it off on a book, that you've ticked it off on some sort of check sheet. This bill is the largest update to the Education Act 1989 in 27 years, and it's a terrible one. It is one of the most terrible updates that could have happened to education in this country, and New Zealand First will fight it every step of the way. And we want to make sure that not only do the public understand what is going on here, that the members of the government do. That maybe, just maybe, even though Mr Muller has already outlined the fact that if the opposition objects, apparently it's because we're closed-minded. So Mr Muller, not quite sure, he has already decided and already laid out the fact that if the opposition objects, apparently the opposition is closed-minded. Let's also be a little bit clear. Digital online learning or online learning is not blended learning. This bill makes it 100% clear that you can replace face-to-face or blended learning with 100% online learning for 5-year-olds through to 18-year-olds. Let's be very, very clear. This is not homeschooling. Homeschooling will still remain. This is not blended learning, which we currently have going on in our school system. This is 100% online learning, and it opens the door up to body corporates and corporates. This is why you need to know your history. Where did this come from? Last term, there was a digital literacy inquiry. Google presented, Microsoft presented. Read their submissions. Go back and look at your history and see where this came from. The Khan Academy, for example, was presented. Oh yes, Mr. Seymour knows all about it because Mr. Seymour works for those corporates. Mr. Seymour understands those corporates. Mr. Seymour is confident that those corporates will get his vote. He believes that business is everything. He has absolutely no regard for the young people involved in here. And even with regard to the special needs parents, he's basically said, vote with your feet. If you don't like the school, if we'll give you a voucher and vote with your feet. Complete disregard to the communities of learning that actually take place. But let's be clear, that's where this came from the Digital Literacy Inquiry in the last Parliament. And it's also where one of the other things that this bill does, it repeals the Private School Act, Integration Act 1975. Now, why haven't we heard anything about this from the integrated schools? Has anybody actually read the regulatory impact statement? Are they aware of what this does with regard to the taxpayers' property dollar for those private assets? Anybody over the other side of the house? No, right. So that's what it does. It repeals and it gives more taxpayers money, and it ties the hand of any future government with regard to any amendment to how education will be delivered. They will have to pay private providers, the integrated school providers, for their private assets from the taxpayer fund. But did anybody read that regulatory impact statement? Doesn't appear to be so. The other thing we've got going on is we've got here strengthening collaborative governance. Now, what this does is, this actually sets out a process by which boards of trustees somehow can sell their services to other schools, other corporates, other trusts, goodness knows who. They're going to be able to sell. These are individual people who have got elected onto school boards of trustees. There is nothing to stop them now individually contracting out their skills, but this creates the opportunity for a board of trustees to sell their services, except that if you keep the principal on those boards of trustees and the staff trustee on the boards of trustees, they become too big and unwieldy. So the suggestion is that when you have an amalgamation of a couple of school boards or whatever, that you remove the staff trustee, you remove the principal because they're too unwieldy. So let's take the voice of those people away, amalgamate some boards of trustees, allow them to sell their services, but make sure that the principals and the staff voice is not inside that process. Interesting, isn't it? Anybody read that? There's another 11 regulatory impact statements, sir, and each one of them does something very, very, very interesting. But the government is hoping that you'll be distracted by the cools. The government is hoping that you'll be distracted, that everybody else will be distracted by the cools. The fact that the cools don't go anywhere near actually providing the digital literacy or the digital understanding and comprehension and coding background that we require of our 21st century students appears to have been lost. The fact that blended learning, and the government has given the te kura as the reason why we must have these online learning facilities, these cools, and it's because apparently te kura has become too unmanageable. It's too big. There's too many students in it. At 23,000 students. Let's just remember. Can we just make sure that we know the data here? 11,000 of those 23,000 students are currently inside New Zealand schools, usually taking around one subject, and the problem is you can't charge for it. The government can't charge for it because they're inside a state school. This is about money. Don't make any mistake. This is about the ability to set fees and charge. The other thing is there's 7,400 young adults who are over 16 and adult learners. Why on earth is te kura? Why are we putting through legislation to change everything inside the state system when that 7,400 young people could be with private providers somewhere else under a different system? There's 800 ECE students who are actually part of te kura. How about we just fund Play Centre? How about we just fund Play Centre or kindergarten or playgroup or something like that, rather than changing the whole of the education system to allowed privatisation? So, sir, New Zealand First will oppose and continue to oppose That's the start. There's another 11 regulatory impact statements for further speeches. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Speaker.
Melissa Lee.